From beautiful downtown Sacramento, it's time for Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Fort Bingo. Spaz has got a show when you really want to know what's going on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Fort Bingo. Art and music, golden view, and your favorite comics too. Grab a spot and settle in, 'cause it's high time we begin. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Spaz Schnee, and welcome to the first ever video episode of my podcast, Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. On this episode, I chat with Duncan Reid. He's a British musician, formerly of legendary punk band The Boys. He now fronts a band called Duncan Reid and the Big Heads. They have a great new album out called Don't Blame Yourself, and we're going to talk about that, feature musical sound bites. You know, you're going to get all the typical Beach Blanket Fort Bingo bells and whistles. And, I've done 43 episodes that you can listen to. You can access them through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Home, wherever fine podcasts can be heard. And in fact, this episode here, you can turn it on and you can watch it or you can listen to it. It's all going to be filled with great, wonderful stuff. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this video episode of Beach Blanket Fort Bingo.
Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo. Beach Blanket Fort Bingo Podcast. Gonna rent my house out to a stranger.
Before we chat about the brand new album, Don't Blame Yourself, let's go back to the beginning. Do you remember the moment that you decided that you wanted to become a musician? I mean, was it a single life-altering experience, or was it a series of events that led you to that decision or that choice?
Well, I was pretty much torn as a young boy between being a professional footballer or soccer player, as you people wrongly call it, and a musician. And the trouble was that I've always been small and slow. And so that's not a great combination for being a football player. So I was pretty much left with musician. And then the deal was sealed when I found an old Hofner bass guitar in my dad's cupboard. And I said, what the hell is that? And I think he'd been trying to hide it from me, but now literally the bass guitar was out of the cupboard and it never went back in.
Before we bring things up to date, you were a member of The Boys from 76 until the first breakup in 82. And of course, Boys have a very, very nice catalog of material. Then the band reunited in 1999. What did you do during that downtime?
Me personally, I did a number of things, and I've written about them. If people go to the Duncan Reid and the Big Heads site, there's a blog there. And I've written about a few of the things that I did. I worked for Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Wow.
I traveled the whole world putting on musicals and doing film deals and all sorts of stuff. I actually ran what was a Premier League football club. They got relegated, then back up to the Premier League, which is a team called Nottingham Forest here in the UK, who in their history have been English champions and European champions. Mm-hmm. And just did a number of jobs, but I've always done something interesting. It was interesting, and of course I brought up a family.
Right.
Which,
okay.
Wouldn't have sat well with being off on the road all the time. I think that's a tough thing for musicians to do. So I took about 15 years off. And then, as you say, the boys got back together again, and I had a great time for about another 10 years, playing all over the world with the boys.
Kelly's gone insane. Kelly's gone insane. Kelly's gone insane. There was no reason or rhyme, but she committed that crime. Now she's running to time. She
Well, you left the boys for good in 2011, and the first solo album, Little Big Head, came out in 2012. Was the prospect of releasing your first solo album in a 35-year career, was that a bit maybe daunting and nerve-wracking?
Yeah, it was, because it wasn't something that I expected to do. It's a subject that I avoided talking about for a long, long time, because I don't think people want to know about it, but it's okay to talk about it now. I had a massive, great fight with someone else in the band that meant that one of us had to go, and it was me. And so I was left with no band, but a bunch of songs. So Little Big Head sort of reflects what I wanted to do at the time. I was very, very lucky to be introduced to an amazing guy called Tony Barber, who's been in bands like Buzzcocks, Chelsea, who was in Nirvana for about 12 minutes. And he had a studio in his garden. And so I played nearly everything on that record and sang everything, which, after being in a band for so long, was something I wanted to do just to see if I could do it. And I was very pleased with how it came out. I think it's a very charming record. It's got some great songs, and it was a great thing for me to do.
Well, at this point, were the songs fairly new, or were some of them left over from the period with the boys?
In the first period of the boys, when I was young, I couldn't write songs. I don't know what it was. I used to sit down and wrote the odd one or two, but they weren't the greatest songs in the world, and it was something that was very difficult for me. And I often say on stage that I was very lucky in that I went to the best songwriting school in the world, because the boys had some amazing songwriters in Matt Dangerfield, Casino Steel, and John Plain. And I think what I do now is influenced more by them than anybody else, because that's where I learned. And then suddenly I had this ability to write songs. It started when John Plain had asked me to write a couple of songs for a solo record that he was doing that actually became a band called the Matless Boys, because everybody from the Boys was in it apart from Matt Dangerfield. And it just carried on from there, and I enjoyed it so much. Had a little home studio, and I was just making these demos thinking, well, maybe one day the boys will make another record, and they can be on that record, maybe. And actually they did make another record, but it was after I left. But thank goodness I'd written those songs, because I had something to start with.
Well, you then formed Duncan Reid and the Big Heads. Was that initially a band in name only, or did you prefer to be part of a band again and working regularly with the same group of musicians?
Yeah, I always wanted to put a band together. And I wish I'd just called it the Big Heads, actually, but I thought that, having been Duncan Reid, bass player, singer in the Boys, would help get us gigs. And it did a little bit in places, but not a huge amount, really. Everything that we've built up under the name of the Big Heads, really. And it would be cleaner and simpler to be the Big Heads now. But hell, I'm not complaining.
Well, with the Big Heads, you went on to release these two amazing albums, which is the Difficult second album and Bombs Away. Both albums are chock full of great songs and filled with more energy than bands half your age. Was it a relief to know that people were coming to gigs based on your material rather than your legacy with the Boys?
Oh yeah, that's been a big thrill, and it gets more and more. And in fact, it's I've said this recently that there's a fine tension at gigs, because we play a handful of boys' songs in the sets, you know, and I love playing them, because who wouldn't like playing First Time and Brickfield Nights and So Depressing, great songs. And the audience sort of fits into two halves, really. There are some people who say, oh, I just love hearing those songs, I'm so glad we played them. And then there are other people who come up and say, oh, don't play those songs, play some more of your own songs, you know. So we just do what we want to do, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
But they are great songs to play live. But the answer to your question is, I just love it when you know, I look out in the audience and they're singing along to Big Head songs. I don't think anything more in the world that gives me a bigger thrill than that.
Ready to sing, and all I know for sure, she better get for me.
Well, you've just released Don't Blame Yourself, which is perhaps the best album of your career. There's so much diversity on the album, from the straight-ahead power pop punk of Your Future Ex-Wife to the title track, which is a wonderful musical homage to T-Rex. What inspired this batch of songs?
I don't have a clue. I really don't know where they come from. They just arrive. And in fact, I did, in this lockdown period, I did a video blog recently, which again is on the Duncan Reid and the Big Head site, where I just recorded the process of writing a song.
Which I've watched.
Just arrive, you know, they just arrive. These tunes come into my head. I had to sing them on a dictaphone, and then I go back and I put the bits together like a jigsaw puzzle, and then I write the words based on something that inspires me, and then record a demo. And it's just what comes out, you know.
Welcome to my world, 'cause we want it lovely absurd. Welcome to my world, please come in and play. Welcome to my world, though you may be shaken and stirred. Welcome to my world, please come in and stay.
Well, the album is a great example of a perfect pop album. I mean, there's enough to keep the punk fans happy, and it will also appeal to the power pop kids as well. And plus, you know, there's plenty of nods to classic pop and rock of the 60s. What was your original vision for the album, or do you usually just, as you were saying, just go where the songs take you?
In terms of the sound of the album, I wanted to make it harder, because there's been lots of people who have said, oh, I wish you'd make a record like you sound live. And my answer to that is actually, records and live are two different things.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't put on a record and listen to it on a massive, great PA system with about 300 or 400 other people. You know, it's just not the same. So you have to do different things. But I did want to bring some of that hard edge that we have live to the record, and I think, you know, on the 8 or 9 or so rockers on the album, I think we succeeded on that.
Well, the album focuses on the great vocals, bringing them further up in the mix and allowing the vocal hooks and harmonies to seemingly float in thin air. In the final stages of post-production and mixing, did you make a conscious effort to make sure that the vocals would really stand out and shine?
I think, no. You know, in some ways, I think they're probably mixed a tiny bit lower than they have been on previous records. But you're right, there is one heck of a lot of them. And it's one of the reasons why the record took such a long time, is that I'm a little bit OCD in putting the vocals together. I'm very, very pernickety and very much a perfectionist with them. And there's a lot of them. You know, there can be 4 of my lead vocals very tightly edited together, and then all these harmonies, and there can be as much as 20 vocal tracks going on at one time, and then they all get mixed back in the mix and you can't hear them.
Come and meet your future ex-wife, your future trouble and strife.
Come on and take my advice. Add a little risk to your life. Here she is, your future ex-wife. Your future sugar and spice. High heels and everything nice. Trouble but worth the high price. Hello gorgeous, buy a girl a drink.
When you take a song to the band, do you have a complete demo with all your ideas on it, or do you let the other band members improvise and add their own musical personalities to each track?
Bit of both.
Okay.
I do make a demo of each track, but more and more I leave them sort of unfinished because I want the band to do what they do. And on this record, more than any other record, it's been amazing. I mean, I've had some great players playing on previous records, but you know, there's more of an influence from the band on this record, and they're half my age, so they come from a different decade. So they will play things that I wouldn't play.
Yeah, right.
They play things that tend to be a bit more pop punk or a bit more 90s or noughties about it, and a lot of it is just stunning. I mean, you listen to say "Welcome to My World,"
Mm-hmm.
and just listen to the way that Sophie and Nick's guitars just seem to weave in and out of each other and sort of go off to a different place. And then, on Tea and Sympathy, where Karen's drums have just changed the song beyond recognition.
Motherfucker. What a fucker. Twist got save the queen and makes it sound obscene. Whoa, whoa. Motherfucker.
Well, what on earth inspired the song "Motherfucker"? Which I'll tell you. No, wait. I'll tell you. When I was first listening to it, I was listening to the tracks. I did not see the track titles. So when that burst out of the speakers, I actually started laughing. But is it also conscious or subconscious musical homage to the Clash's second version of Capitol Radio? Because the gentle acoustic guitars at the beginning they're pretty deceptive, given what's just about to happen.
No, that's an interesting point. It isn't. I have to be very careful now, especially I'm under strict orders from my wife not to be too explicit about who that song is about, because he's a very, very rich man.
Oh.
And he's certainly a lot richer than me with bigger and nastier lawyers. So it's about a very aristocratic English politician. And reading a tweet one day about this young lad from an area of England that is very working class and very common, eulogizing this politician, knowing that politician would think that young lad is a complete utter piece of dirt. And that just made me a bit annoyed. So I wrote the song, but it is funny. I agree with you. I think it's a funny word.
Yeah.
It's very easy. You see it in lots of films, don't you? Just say that word and it's funny. It's got me into trouble, that song, because normally, obviously, we're playing in clubs and the audience is grown up, and even if they wouldn't use that language, they find it funny. But the few festivals we played at, I've seen parents with little kids there, so they stiffen up, very, very stiff. Put their hands over the kids' ears, And I've got one big fan in particular who's an ex-policeman, and he's always sending me messages about that one. He's very nice and he's very complimentary, but he's always telling me off about it.
Oh, what a lovely day. Gorgeous in every way.
Well, like "Oh, What a Lovely Day" has a real kind of almost 80s vibe to it. What inspired the recording or the sound of that song?
It's I've always loved that guitar that's very airy, heavy reverb. It gives that sort of airy, floating feel to it. Yeah. And the keyboards I'm very proud of. The lines there I think are very nice. And it's actually a pretty I think it's a pretty brave mix because it starts off with the keyboards and those very floaty guitars, and then everything disappears apart from the drums, bass, and voice.
Yeah.
And it goes right down, and then things start to come back in that dreamy sort of way. And it's a mix that I'm really proud of. I think it's pretty brave and original.
See, I think that one of the great things about this album, and I'm going off script here, is the fact that it is so diverse and there's so many different things happening. It's not, when you talk about the 8 or 9 rockers on the album, intermixed with all this other great stuff. Those 8 or 9 rockers, even if you put them all together, they don't sound the same.
I'm glad you say that because it's one of the things I'm most proud about is that it is such a diverse album. And there's plenty of great bands around at the moment, but you show me many of them who can, put out a record that is so diverse, but at the same time hangs together. I think you've done something really great there,
It will bring. Who can say? And so he lives for today in every way, and that's the way he'll stay. He walks in the heart.
Like the song Dave has a slightly similar vibe to that Over a Lovely Day, but it's also very emotional lyrically. What can you tell us about that track?
Well, I was very lucky one morning because I got someone who downloaded, I think it was Bombs Away on from Bandcamp. And as I do, I just wrote a little note saying, thank you very much for downloading our album. And I got back the most lovely email from Dave Bundy, who lives in Nebraska. I think is it Lincoln, Nebraska?
Lincoln, yeah.
Yeah, Lincoln, Nebraska. And he's the editor on a local paper there. And he said, oh, no, don't say thank you to me. I want to say thank you because I have to go to the hospital in Minnesota about twice a month for my cancer treatment. And I listen to your records on the way and they keep me going. I thought, wow, And I've just been through a bit of a period and we all have our ups and downs thinking, oh, is this worth it? And then I read that email and I thought, do you know what? That's worth it.
Yeah.
And over the years since, I've had a great email relationship with Dave. We tend to swap emails about 2 or 3 times a month, and he's very funny and it's very entertaining. I've learned all about his family and what have you. And it was just a great subject for me to write a song about, this guy who has this long drive twice a month to the hospital where he's going to learn, how are the tests? Is everything okay? And he learns, yes, it's okay. It was just a great, inspiring story for me. It was quite a difficult track to record. I'd made a very good demo of it, and the track wasn't going very well in the studio until we came up with that very heavy synthesizer sound that's on it. It does the bass. And it's a real growly synthesizer. And as soon as we came up with that one, the whole track came together. And I was so pleased that it made it onto the album, just for Dave.
Well, hey, 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 just would say, party on. And hey, 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 let's all play.
From the moment you start writing, does a song take different forms during the writing and recording process? Like, for example, did the Grim Reaper originally start out as a jaunty pop song, or did it just evolve into that?
Well, it's got 2 bits to it. It's got that intro, hasn't it? Which is, again, the line just came to me, about singing old-fashioned songs, and the idea, for me, doing what I do at my ridiculous old age, just to try and stay young,
Yeah.
And it does keep me young. And so this idea came. And then, went through a period where, as I write on the sleeve, I had 3 good friends who died in quick succession. So the idea came to me that about having this song about telling the Grim Reaper to just either join in with the party or get lost. And at the same time, I had musically, as I mentioned before, this thing came into my head, and on the piano, which I just put on the dictaphone, of this jaunty little, almost Charleston-like piano bit. I thought, cool idea to marry this quite heavy idea, which is basically, about death, with this jaunty little tune. It's quite a good, it's quite a good conflict between those 2 ideas.
Some sympathy. Why so long? Life goes on, ever on, with tea and sympathy. No time to remember that.
Tea and Sympathy has a lovely melody and this wonderful vocal arrangement. Like the rest of the album, you certainly seem more concerned with writing perfect pop songs than most bands do. Do you feel that pure pop is a lost art and maybe misunderstood?
Well, I was beginning to think that, but actually, I've discovered a lot of great bands out there, a lot of great power pop bands out there, and a lot coming out of the States as well as other places. And in its little pockets, certainly as far as bands making music, it seems to be really alive and thriving. It doesn't get the exposure that it should do.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of good stuff being made.
Well, hey, didn't I do well? A legend in my lunchtime, can't you tell? And hey, maybe you don't know me, but I'm a big head, can't you see? All over the world.
Well, you've finally written your own theme song with Ballad of a Big Head. Now, what was the motivation behind that?
Well, it's a combination of 2 things. It's sort of saying thank you to everybody all around the world who is just so damn nice. And you can get a pretty big head with everybody being so nice to you. But at the same time, taking what we say in England, taking the mickey out of myself for being a big head. So there's references in there to being a legend into my lunchtime. People are always saying, "Oh, you're the punk rock legends," and I was always thinking, "Who are they talking about? They're talking about me," because it doesn't seem right. So I thought it was a healthy mix of saying thank you and taking the piss out of myself.
Blame it on Marek. Blame it on Henrik. Blame it on everyone else. Blame Angelino and poor old Diego. But don't blame yourself. Well, the politicians told.
And what inspired the title track?
Yeah, it's got a great sound, that track. It's really interesting because it's got that sort of chugging T-Rex guitar on it. It's also got a very almost psychedelic tremolo guitar thing going on, and then right at the end, Sophie comes up with a great riff, which is almost pure Peter Green era Fleetwood Mac, which is works really well. Yeah, the original idea came because our merch guy, Bent, big German guy who lives in Hamburg, said to me, "Oh, I really love it when you sing low, because most of the time I sing quite high."
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, when you sing real low, I just really love it. You should write a song singing low," he said. And when Ben tells you to do something, it's a good idea to do it, because he's a lot bigger than most of us, you know. So I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. So I had to go, and I think what's come out is really interesting. And then when I was doing the demo, I was sort of getting into that vibe. But first, just on the guitar, and then I thought, well, you know, I'm going to stick the bass on that sounds like Get It On. And it's a great combination. The tune is nothing like Get It On, but the guitars and the bass I really like that. And I love T-Rex. I thought T-Rex was brilliant.
To live or live not, that is the question. To love or love not, before my time's up. To lose the whole plot, Mexican confession. To sin or sin not, I've made my mind up. Gonna catch the first plane to Caracas.
But, you know, with this great batch of songs, is it hard to choose the tracks that you're going to release as singles or videos or focus tracks, you know, whatever you want to call them nowadays?
Not really. I think from the minute we've finished recording, just listening to them, To Live or Live Not was my favorite. It's got a great energy to it. I love the breakdown in the middle with what is a combination of synthesizer and tremolo guitar. Great backing vocals from Karen on it. I just love it, and that was my favorite track. So that'll be the first one with a video to it.
The sign of a great album is when you wake up the next morning and you have a different favorite track. So, you know, yesterday it could have been Dave. I think today was Welcome to My World. And who knows what tomorrow? I mean, Tea and Sympathy was my favorite song 2 days ago. You know?
Oh, that's really interesting. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, but you've got this great album, and then suddenly the whole world is on lockdown. Since you can't take it on the road, are you planning to maybe do some virtual acoustic things?
We will get round to that. I didn't want to do the acoustic thing on an iPhone myself because you know, there's enough people out there doing that, and they can probably do it a lot better than me. But we will definitely do something. Maybe record, unless we're allowed to get together to do a recording together. Maybe record bits and pieces separately and put them together.
Right.
We've got to do something.
Yeah. Well, where can viewers and listeners keep up to date on all things Duncan Reid and the Big Heads?
I think the two best places, as I mentioned, the website, DuncanReidandTheBigHeads.com, and also the Duncan Reid and the Big Heads Facebook page is where we tend to put most of the news out. So keep in touch with those. Those are the two best ones. Right.
Well, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to stop by the Blanket Fort and chat about the new album. Now, please stay healthy, stay safe, and be well.
Same to you, and same to everybody.
To live or live not, that is the question.